All right, here is your answer key. So if you'd like to, you can pause so you can double check your answers. Okay, let's get started. So what matches were tricky for you? And why do you think that they were? So for example, I hope that equation C, which was y equals 15, that was a fairly easy one for you, as well as equation, I'm looking here, D, which was linear, so hopefully that went well. And then the other two that I think I would have eliminated next if it were me were equation E and F, as those were both quadratic. And you know that the shape of those is a parabola. So what adjustments did you need to make in your matches when you look? So hopefully after we just talked about the line, the two lines and the two parabolas, hopefully you made some adjustments there. If there are things that might have caused an error, what could you have done differently? And then think about what adjustments did you make? So once you saw these answers, did you realize, oh, those were, because it was x squared was the highest degree in the polynomial, did you realize then, oh, that's going to be a parabola? Okay, and then knowing if it was, say, x to the 5th power or x to the 3rd power, that you were going to have a lot of twists and turns in your graph. Okay, so one thing that we need to talk about, though, with these graphs that make it helpful is let's look at these three right here. Okay, so the first one, hopefully that you can see that the shape of this graph is a parabola. All right, and so just to kind of go with that, that if you looked at the equation, the highest degree or the highest exponent value would be a 2, would be x squared, to give you a graph that looks like this. And one of the things that they wanted us to talk about right now was what are called like maximums and minimums, okay? And so right here where we have this valley, all right, this would be known as a minimum, okay? And it is an absolute minimum because this is the lowest the graph will ever go. Okay, so whenever you see a valley, that is a minimum. Now, if we look over on graph 2, let's go and see, and you can see that we do have a valley. My pen here. So here's our valley right here. Okay, and that is a minimum. But if you notice, the bottom of this graph, even though we don't see an arrow, we know it implies that this is going to go on forever. So if it goes on forever and ever, obviously this is not the lowest point of the graph, but because the valley is there, this is what's known as a relative minimum. Okay. Over here, this one is an absolute minimum because it absolutely does not go any lower. Okay. All right. Now let's also talk now about maximums. Okay. This one here, graph 2, this has a relative maximum because we see a peak. So when you see that peak like the top of a mountain, you know that it is a maximum. Now it's not the absolute maximum because again, up here we can see that the graph implies that it's going to go on forever. So it actually not even reach the maximum. But this right here would be a relative maximum. Also to let you know, this graph right here represents a cubic, which means it's the highest degree in the polynomial would be a 3 and it would be x cubed, and it's going to produce this type of graph. All right, over here, let's look at this one and see if we can identify any minimums or maximums. So right here, I can see a minimum, okay? And because the graph doesn't go any lower, this would be the absolute minimum. But also here, notice there's a little tiny valley right here. So that is also a minimum. So this one has 2, and this would be known as a relative minimum. All right, let's see if we have any maximums. So I'm looking for peaks like the top of a mountain, which I would see right here. So we do have that. It would be known as a relative maximum because we can see the graph actually keeps on going up here. Okay. And the shape of this type of graph would be something with a degree of a polynomial that would be over 3. All right, just go back here to our quadratic. I do want to point out there was no maximum because we did not see any type of peak. All right, so at this point, you can go ahead then and you can move on to activity 3.